A checkpoint guard slammed the ledger shut and said, "Turn back, this road is closed." Mateo Corin stepped forward with the folded map pressed to his ribs and felt longing flare in his throat. He had walked toward the lamplight because a single name on a paper could still pull him home. Longing drove his feet before he could measure risk. The guard tapped a fresh exclusion notice to the post and did not look away. Concrete stakes arrived with the paper. His birthplace was written there and barred. Mateo kept his voice low. "Please. I only need to cross to the third lane. I have goods for my sister." The guard did not answer for 3 slow breaths. He wore a cuff that matched the council's brass pin. "Mateo Corin, we have your name. Orders are orders." Longing had been the engine. Doubt followed. He hesitated, fingers on the satchel strap, and checked the map's softened crease as if another fold might change the ink. The crowd behind him shifted. A cart rumbled a little farther down the road. Mateo's doubt hardened into a small knot of suspicion when the guard's eyes flicked past him toward the ruined road that led back to his childhood street. Within 5 sentences the problem was clear. A legal exclusion at the town approach had stopped him, and it would not be answered with pleading. Mateo turned, coat collar up, and walked away from the boundary, the map tucked inside his satchel like contraband. He did not go far. The tavern by the approach sat with smoke tasting faintly of peat, windows blood amber in the dusk. Mateo pushed the door and smelled stew and oil lamp. He slid to a corner table where the keeper poured a small bowl without asking. "Mateo," the keeper said, "you should not have come tonight." "Why?" Mateo, dipping a crust. His voice contained the first shift, longing to suspicion to sharp, quiet anger. "They've posted new orders," the keeper said. Magistrate Thorne signed 3 lists this week. Neighbor Anna, who kept her chair close, pulled a torn circular from beneath her cloak and pushed it across the table. Her fingertips trembled. "Look," she said. "They named streets. They named houses. They didn't just move people, they forbade return. They circled some names by hand." Mateo read the circled names. He found a childhood surname he recognized and closed his eyes for a fraction of a breath. He himself not to look for the inked mark that would mean family. He looked anyway. The circle around his village's name was thick, the magistrate's hand looping with a slow certainty. "Who gave you that?" "Mateo." "Not for me to say," Anna replied. "Harris slipped it to me. Said he could not bear to let such a thing be published without someone seeing." Harris was a clerk in the municipal offices. The keeper and Anna exchanged a glance that carried shame. Mateo's chest tightened. The day's emotion had moved from yearning to a pressing, cold suspicion that the law targeted particular people, rather than broad zones. Outside, a cart creaked by and a messenger called a single rote name. Mateo folded his map open just enough to trace the street lines he remembered. He traced them with a fingertip and felt the paper's raised fiber. The map smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. That small sensory detail steadied him. Concrete memory rather than abstract grief. When the tavern door shut against the night, a shadow slid across the lane. Magistrate Ilan Thorne sat at a small wooden desk under a single lamp in the municipal ledger room. She had a ledger open and the pages smelled of ink and rubbed hands. Her hand hovered above the page where names had been circled. She tapped the ledger with a pen and, in a motion that was clean and deliberate, authorized a fresh set of exclusion orders. Ilan's motion contained another emotion shift, though she would not name it. Duty had carved out space in her chest. Behind that an H she tried not to measure. She kept the ledger closed because ink commitments shaped people's lives. "Seal these," she told the clerk. "Harris, we have to." Ilan began and stopped. She folded her hands and listened to the clerk scrape twine across a stack of orders. Harris tied the packets and did not meet her eyes. The clerk left a small scrap of paper on the desk by accident. Mateo would later hold that scrap in his fingers like proof. The scrap bore honest handwriting and the line that mattered. The village where Mateo had been born with its name circled by the magistrate's own hand. This was the first clear revelation that the law was not an aloof instrument of safety. It contained deliberate exclusions written by people who could have chosen otherwise. Mateo left the tavern after a slow meal. The night had shifted toward rain. His scarf clung to his neck. He moved between pools of lamplight and felt the town's silence press in. He kept expecting some old neighbor to call from a window. No one called. At the boundary he paused. A post held the new notice that the guard had read earlier. It fluttered in the wind. Mateo set his palm on the damp wood and found a faint groove where nails had sliced before. He unfolded his map in the lamplight and ran his thumb along the pencil marks he had made as a boy. The thumb remembered streets and a porch step and the line where the river bent. When Magistrate Ellen emerged at the checkpoint that night, it was not with fanfare. She came in an oyster coat and carried the brass pin that meant office more than comfort. She stood at the barrier and looked at Mateo with a composure that served the law. "Mateo Corin," she said. "You cannot pass." Magistrate Thorne, Mateo. Ellen, call me magistrate in public." 3 quick lines of argument began. The first rapid exchange was sharp. "Mateo, Ellen, orders are signed." "You signed them," Mateo replied. "They keep the town safe." "Safe for whom?" Mateo shot back. The guard shifted his weight. "Step back, please." Ellen's voice did not raise, but the pen tapping in her hand quickened. The back and forth contained 3 to 6 lines. The town's official voice met Mateo's blunt need. He pressed for details. She offered the legal rationale. How names had been chosen. "We reviewed the zones, Ellen." "You circled names by hand, not by whim," she answered. Their exchange carried confession and denial in the same breath. Mateo leaned close enough for the lamplight to catch his cheekbone. He smelled smoke and salt, and the worn leather of his satchel. The specificity of those smells anchored his protest in memory. He was not arguing abstractly about rights, but about a house where a mother had left a pie cooling on the sill. The guard motioned, "Move on." Mateo did not move immediately. He slid his fingers into his satchel and touched the wooden talisman tied there. The talisman had been whittled by an uncle who kept a small boat. It had the curve of a wave carved into its face. Mateo had planned to bring it back to a sister. Instead, it sat cold against his palm. There the second emotional shift took place. After suspicion rose anger, and that anger gave way to a quiet, stubborn resolve. He could not pass, but he could refuse Irasha. When he turned away, he did something small and deliberate. He took the talisman from his satchel and looped its cord around the boundary post, knotting it twice where the new notice was nailed. He did not speak. The guard watched with the same caution he had when reading orders. The knot held. The talisman did not change the law, but it left a private mark. "Why do this?" the guard said. Mateo's voice was measured, "So someone knows someone was here." The guard's jaw eased for a moment. "This is not for the likes of us to decide." Mateo stepped back into the night. He had been turned away, and yet the knot in his fingers relaxed with a small, stubborn heat. He had performed an action that could not be undone by ink. That action was not protest in the street. It was a private insistence that his home had existed, and that somebody still remembered. He rented a room in a house with a single window that opened onto the lane. The room smelled of boiled cabbage and wet wool. Mateo folded his softened map and set it on the narrow bed beside his coat. He laid the talisman on top and stroked the carved wave. He counted the stitches along the satchel strap, as if enumerating small certainties. Before dawn, Magistrate Ellen Thorne returned to her ledger. She sat with the same lamp and the ledger open in the same place. The circled names remained. She placed her spectacles on the desk and rubbed the bridge of her nose with the heel of her hand. Her action was not grandiose. She did not tear the pages or sign a resigned order. Her fingers hovered over the page, then closed the ledger and touched the small burn scar on her knuckle, as if to check whether the feeling there was real. Harris came in with a bundle tied in twine. "The orders have been distributed," he said. His voice held relief and a trace of guilt. Ellen listened and said, "Make a note of those who resist." Her voice held a calculation that was not cruel but worn by duty. Harris left a scrap under the ledger by mistake. It was a small failure of neatness that created a revelation. On that scrap was a list with a circled village. Mateo would later hold that scrap and rid the magistrate's hand. The clerk's small betrayal had changed what Mateo knew. The exclusion was targeted and personal in ways the posted notices did not say. The tavern, Anna, and the keeper argued softly about what to do with names that appeared in the circular. "We cannot hide them all," the keeper said. "We can pass word to those who must leave tonight," Anna replied. "Mateo must go elsewhere then," the keeper said. "Mateo has nowhere else to go," Anna answered. "He is not a stranger." Conversation kept moving the plot. Each line offered new fact, new pressure. In that way the chapter fed the rule that every few paragraphs a new external event must arrive. A posted notice, a slipped scrap, a guarded confrontation, a tied talisman. Mateo slept in fits. He woke with the map on his chest and the talisman under his palm. He rehearsed choices. Leave town entirely, seek legal appeal, go to friends in the next borough. Each possibility was a concrete step or a refusal to act. His choices were not speeches. They were measured in tickets, footsteps, and the cost of a night's lodging. In the morning the ledger room smelled of boiled tea and the municipal clerk's ink. Elin lingered with the ledger closed. She lifted the brass pin to her lapel and felt it cool against her palm. The ledger's entries had weight. She held the weight and did not move to release it. Mateo walked to the boundary once more at dawn. The talisman hung from the post in the grey light, beads of rain on its carved surface. The guard saw him and nodded without speaking. Mateo touched the talisman and felt the wood cold and familiar. He folded his map and placed it back into the satchel. This was the chapter's small resolution. Mateo had been refused entry and had left a private mark at the boundary. The ledger remained unchanged. The magistrate kept her ledger, and the clerk wrapped the orders. Yet in the exchange of small actions, the clerk's scrap, Anna's torn circular, the talisman tied to the post, the human cost of the law showed itself in concrete ways instead of abstract labels. Before the chapter closed, Magistrate Elin stood at her office window and watched the lane where the boundary post stood. She did not call Mateo by name. She did not undo the orders. She set her hand flat on the ledger and then closed it with a slow, deliberate motion. The final image of the night is direct and tangible. Mateo folding his softened map in his rented room, pressing the talisman to his mouth and tucking it into his satchel for the road, while Elin set her pen down and pushed the ledger into a locked drawer. Mateo left the room at first light with his satchel and his map folded. He did not attempt to cross the barrier again. He walked instead toward the quay where work offered wages, and toward survival that did not pretend to be home. He carried the map and the talisman in his hands, evidence that a place had mattered. The chapter ends with Mateo closing the door of his rented room and stepping into the street, the talisman warm against his palm and the map folded inside his coat, and with Magistrate Elin placing the ledger's key into her pocket and walking down the municipal stair to the council clerk, where another day of orders awaited. A registry clerk snapped a drawer shut and barked. "Hold him." Mateo Corin's hand tightened on the strap of his satchel. Longing sat under his ribs like a stone and pushed his feet forward anyway. He had not planned to be seen at the municipal registry, but he had been following the courier for 2 days, watching the courier's route and the way he paused by tavern doors. Longing, the emotion that drove him to keep names alive, moved him toward trouble. Suspicion crept in next, suspicion that a single folded map could change who was allowed to speak a name. Mateo swallowed and stepped forward, keeping his chin low. He saw the map finally, damp paper, the corner softened by many hands. The clerk had unfolded it on the counter and traced a faded line with a crooked fingernail. "This paper is contraband," the clerk said. "It names places we do not permit." "Which places?" Mateo, though he already knew what printed syllables could do when the exclusion law was enforced. His name aloud so the registry would place it in the ledger, Mateo Corin, because being known offered a kind of protection. The clerk looked at him, then at the tucked ledger where someone had shut the drawer too quickly the last time Mateo had passed the checkpoint. Mateo's memory flashed back to the bridge inspection. A guard slamming the ledger shut and saying, "Turn back, this road is closed." He folded that memory into the present and moved on it. Magistrate Elin Thorne stood behind the counter. She held a brass lapel pinned close to her chest and tapped a pen against her ledger. Her face made small, precise movements. Mateo watched the tapping. Suspicion shifted into uncertainty when he noticed Ellen's hand trembling the slightest amount as she closed the file on the seized map. He had seen her at the bridge. She had enforced the line with measured words. He had watched her wince when a woman pleaded. Mateo's longing to touch the place where he had been born met a new doubt. Had she been the one to order the removals recorded on the maps? He could not tell yet. "Ilan, bring him here." Her voice measured the registry room's short distance. The courier stumbled in, his palms wet. The clerk pushed the folded map across the counter like a small accusation. He was carrying this between parcels, the clerk said. The courier looked at Mateo. "I did not mean trouble," he said. "I was paid to move paper only." Mateo stepped forward. He did not reach for the map. He kept his palm flat against his satchel, where a wooden talisman rubbed the leather. He wanted the map more than he wanted to be caught. That longing moved his breath into a tight rhythm. Ilan lifted the map with 2 fingers and held it by the damp corner. She read a single place name out loud, slow and precise. The name landed on Mateo like a struck bell. He had written that name on the folded map months earlier, handwriting cramped, the ink dark where rain had spread it. He had thought the name might die with distance. It had not. Ilan closed the map and tied a piece of twine around it. "Keep him detained until I finish entries," she said. Her throat made a small, audible shift. Mateo noticed it. He read that sound as private conflict. He had seen the ledger before her, a list that reduced lives to dates and signatures. He had watched a guard shut it fast at the checkpoint. He had felt the ledger's weight the day he was named on it. The registry room felt small, concrete, and dangerous. After a few minutes that stretched with small gestures, pages turned, a quill scraped, Ellen stepped aside and spoke quietly to the clerk. Mateo leaned in just enough to catch the phrase, patterns of exchange. The words meant surveillance and a hunt. Mateo felt suspicion deepen into fear. He tightened his fingers on the satchel strap until his knuckles whitened. Outside the registry, the town's streets carried the low sound of late afternoon people. Mateo left the building by a side door and walked the back alleys so the registry would not follow him at once. He needed a place to hide the map or to move it farther still. Longing had brought the map into the open. Fear now urged him to keep moving. He reached the boarding house back stairs just as dusk wet the air. The courier waited at the landing, cheeks stained with small sweat beads and shame. He pressed something damp into Mateo's hand. The folded map slipped into the satchel with the wooden talisman and made a soft rustle. "Mateo," the courier said, "take this." "Please." Mateo did not ask why. He tightened the scarf at his throat and let the courier go. The courier left down the stairs with hurried steps and a hand pressed over his mouth. Mateo lingered. He felt a shift in himself. Longing had moved to protectiveness. He chose to hide this trace rather than to hand it to someone safer. The choice anchored the night's work. That night, in the ruined chapel where they met under slate arches and broken plaster, Mateo spread the damp map on a wooden pew. Rosa and Jonas came with candles and steady hands. Rosa carried a small tin with extra quills. Jonas carried 2 blank sheets of paper folded into his coat. They formed a small triangle of light and movement around the map. "Name it plainly, Jonas," and he held out a finger to point at a line on the paper. "How did you get this?" "Rosa." Her voice was short, worry tightened it. Mateo touched the map's edge and said, "The courier. He brought it out of the registry." Ilan had him held. Rosa looked at Mateo, then at Jonas. "If Magistrate Thorne knows, she'll trace routes," she said. "She knows routes already," Jonas replied. The name of the place on the map in a way that made the pew's wood creak. "She signed evacuation orders once. I saw the marks." All 3 paused. The light in the chapel made the map's lines darker and the shadows thinner. Mateo felt a new motion inside him. Suspicion turned to a focused anger. He tightened his jaw. He had been trying to keep names alive. Now a question arrived with teeth. Who benefited from the law? Jonas's confession created the first true twist in their plans. "You signed them, Mateo Jonas." Jonas's answer was quiet. "Yes, I did the paperwork at the barracks." I did not watch them leave. I handled the lists. Rosa's hand trembled as she reached to steady a candle. Why tell us now? She asked. Why tell us this? Jonas rubbed his knuckle. Because I saw an entry on this map that matched my handwriting. Magistrate Thorne's ledger had a similar mark. Someone used my seal as proof. Mateo heard the lines of the earlier checkpoint, the guard slamming the ledger shut, and put two events together. The registry seizure stopped being a random confiscation. It became evidence that connected enforcement to specific signatures and names. Longing had led Mateo to the map. Suspicion and anger turned him toward accusation. They worked in the chapel with a rhythm that mixed small gestures and speech. Rosa traced the torn corner with a quill. Jonas copied the rote onto fresh sheets. Mateo kept watch at the doorway. Each scrape of pen or fold of paper was a risk. Outside, boots moved past the chapel at steady intervals. The group listened and paused when the sound approached. Every 3 to 5 paragraphs of action, some outside event drew their attention. A patrol's laugh, a cart clattering past, a distant hammer at a roof. By midnight, they had traced 2 copies. Rosa signed one with a small cross and hid it inside a rolled cloth. Jonas tucked the other into his coat. They were careful to handle the map as a document rather than a relic. The map's lines had to survive. Mateo watched their fingers move and felt the emotion shift again. Protectiveness softened into a quiet resolve. He would not cross the line that night, but he would make sure the names did not vanish. 2 nights later, a report came in at the outpost. A checkpoint sergeant described a traveler carrying a wooden talisman matching Mateo's satchel. Ilan read the report aloud in her office while the ledger lay open and the quill made small, deliberate scratches. A talisman like this, the sergeant said, and Mateo, listening from the chapel's side alley hours later, felt his pulse quicken. The report made the pursuit personal. The ledger became not just records but faces. Ilan's face did not give away what she felt. She tapped a pen and folded her hands. Find him gently, she said. Her voice anchored the order. Mateo heard the order moving like a shadow toward him. Fear rose in him again and then transformed into strategy. He looked at the copies in Jonas's care and decided the next move would be public and costly, or small and private. He chose small. He would not draw a scene that would let soldiers take the names. He planned a theft for one quiet dawn. At the temporary inspection on the river bridge before dawn, Mateo tested the border. Guards stood under slate lamps and checked satchels by the light. Rosa and Jonas kept to the shadow of the chapel's rubble until the moment. Mateo walked toward the barrier with his collar turned up and his satchel low. He moved like a man not expecting trouble, but his hands were ready. A guard stepped forward. Name, the guard asked. Mateo saw Magistrate Ilan move out from behind a grouping of officials. She wore an oyster coat, and the brass lapel pin glinted at her chest. His breath made a small sound. Mateo Corin, he said. He kept his voice low. Ilan's eyes narrowed. Your papers. She held out a hand. Mateo hesitated. He felt a surge of shame and then defiance. The emotion shifted from fear into controlled daring. He lowered his satchel as if to offer it. Guards reached for the strap. Rosa moved, but Jonas held her arm. A short argument erupted. Let him through. Rosa, quickly. Rosa, stand down. Jonas hissed. You cannot let a law swallow names. Rosa, Mateo. One guard pushed the satchel strap aside and glanced inside. He did not notice the folded corner already missing from the map. Ilan read from the ledger with a slow, certain voice. This road is closed. There was a rapid back, and forth as guards consulted, and Ilan ordered. 3 quick exchanges. Turn back, the sergeant said. You will be detained. Another guard replied. No detention today. Ilan after a pause that bent the conversation. Those lines made up a short conflict where orders and human choices collided. In the scramble, Mateo saw his window. He let his fingers slip from the strap and moved toward the bridge stone. He left a folded corner of the map tucked into a small gap in the masonry where the river's spray had eroded the mortar. He felt the cool stone press into his palm as he pushed the paper into the crack. The concrete, the sound of water, the scrape of cloth against the stone were precise sensations. Ilan reached toward him. Mateo, she said, but the guard stepped between her and the bridge. She closed her hand over the ledger and sighed in a way that was a private thing, not a public statement. They stopped him and sent him away from the boundary. Rosa and Jonas walked back with him, each bearing a different face. Jonas blank and careful, Rosa trembling and focused. Mateo walked with his head low. The guards retreated to their posts. Ilan watched them go and then returned to her ledger, making notes with a steady hand. The chapter's climax had passed in a few hard breaths, and the emotional strain moved again, defeat folded into a small, private victory. Back at the ruined chapel at morning, Rosa and Jonas worked by candlelight, and then by a washed slant of daylight that found its way through the broken glass. They traced the fragment Mateo had hidden and reproduced it carefully onto clean paper. The air smelled of candle wax and old wood. Rosa whistled softly as she tied a bundle of copies. Jonas folded each sheet with slow hands and tucked them into a hollow in a beam above the pew where a loose nail had made a shelf. They were quiet but resolute. "Jonas, this will travel farther now." His voice was small but sure. Rosa answered, "It will not stop them from trying." Mateo leaned his forehead against the chapel's cool stone and felt his throat constrict. He did not speak the word longing now. He watched actions instead. Jonas's fingers pressing down the fold, Rosa's careful knot. Those hands carried decisions. When the group broke, Rosa kept one copy rolled into a cloth and pressed it to her chest. Jonas tucked a copy into a hollow in his boot. Mateo kept nothing on his person but the satchel and the faint smell of smoke. The ledger's pressure eased but did not lift. The town still had lists. People still watched rotes. Outside the chapel, a cart rolled by. A child called a vendor's name. Somewhere on the river, oars stilled. The world carried ordinary sounds that same morning, and within them the group had made a deliberate, small theft from the law's reach. A week later, a note arrived at the tavern where Rosa sometimes tended. It was a single folded sheet with 2 words and a time. Rosa read it at the table and then looked toward Mateo. "Jonas will be at the dock at dusk," she said. Mateo nodded. He had been carrying the memory of Ellen's hand on the ledger and the bridge stone's cool bite. The emotion inside him now settled into cautious attention. He did not promise to cross the line anymore. He had left a corner of the map hidden and had seen it turned into copies. That act resolved the immediate conflict. The rigid enforcement at the registry and the bridge had failed to erase the name entirely. They had made a small network. Names would travel folded under cloth, tucked in boot heels, and traced by candlelight. The registry still logged entries. Magistrate Ilan Thorne still read the ledger with the same steady hand. Mateo still felt the pull of the place he could not return to. But concrete things had changed. A seized map had been copied. A folded corner lived inside a bridge stone. 2 trusted friends carried the copies forward. The chapter closed on the quiet, definite event of Rosa sliding her fingers into the gap beneath the bridge stone and drawing out the folded paper corner. She held it up so Mateo could see the inked line. He touched the edge once and then set his hand flat on the cool mortar, a small, precise gesture that tied the night's choices to the daylight's work. Mateo slid the folded map across the splintered table as boots thundered in the alley and Thomas hissed, "Do you want to be seen?" Longing tightened Mateo's throat and pushed his hand forward despite the noise. He kept his voice low. "Thomas," he said, read it once more. The courier tapped the paper, then looked up with a hard edge in his eyes. The tavern's backroom smelled of stale ale and wood smoke. Enya moved toward the door and left it cracked, so the alley's guard racket carried in like a warning. Thomas unfolded the map and counted off a narrow service road with his finger. "This one," he said. "It avoids the patrols for 3 furlongs, but the permit must look right." His fingers hesitated on a particular crease. Mateo's hand went to the satchel strap. He traced the worn knot that held the wooden talisman. His fingers worked the cord without thinking, the same small motion he had made each time he told himself he would go back and never did. He did not say, "I must see the gate," though his jaw tightened. The palpable problem sat in the room. The exclusion law was enforced by ink and signatures, and any crossing without the right mark would mean arrest or worse. Thomas looked at Mateo. "You know the risk. Guard rule recognizes that charm." He knows the trade routes and the men who use the road. He set the map down. If a guard stops you, they'll take you straight to the ledger. You know what that ledger does. Mateo's reply was a short, steady, I know. He folded his hands around the satchel strap so hard his knuckles paled. He had pushed toward lamplight before. In Chapter 1, a checkpoint guard had slammed a ledger shut and told him to turn back. In Chapter 2, he had followed a courier into the registry and been nearly seized when a clerk snapped a drawer closed. Those concrete defeats had not erased his plan. They had sharpened it. Enya filled 2 cups and set one before Mateo without speaking. Her motions were quick and exact. Enya, Thomas, you will hold the back room if a patrol comes. Keep the front empty and serve like nothing is wrong. Enya nodded. I heard Rawl was out twice this week. If he smells anything odd, he'll search every stitch. She put a cup to Mateo's lips. Drink slow. Warmth steadies hands. Her voice carried the practical authority of someone who kept rooms and kept watch. Mateo took the cup and set it down. He breathed through his nose. The longing in his chest shifted into a tight fear that pulled his shoulders up. If they take me, tell my sister he stopped, because any promise in that room could become evidence. Thomas cut across him. No names in public. Thomas, you know that Mateo. He tapped the map again. We move at dawn. Service road, forged permit. Enya meets the courier at the lane. If guard Rawl stops a man with a charm, you break eye contact and walk slow. I distract. Enya pulls a pot off the stove and spills it in front of him. He will check the stove, listen to a noise, and the rest of us go. Thomas looked at Mateo. You will walk behind me. You will not run. Mateo's jaw worked. I will not run. The room watched him by breathing. His choice hardened. He the word aloud to prove it to himself. They rehearsed the rote in quick sentences. Thomas named a hedge, a broken fence post, an empty stall. Enya recited the pattern the guard used when he checked permits. Mateo drew the rote with his finger on the map, and each finger stroke was a small vow. The plan made the risk feel real and manageable. It moved longing into purpose. Outside, Boots paused under the signboard and then walked on. Voices of the patrol traded numbers and brief commands. Thomas looked through the cracked door and mouthed a count. 2 in the lane now, he said. He lowered his voice. One will take the passbooks, the other the ledger. If the ledger opens, there's no bargaining. His eyes found Mateo's. Mateo's hands tightened so that his nails left white crescents. He swallowed. Then we keep the ledger closed, he said, and the sentence became a plan rather than a wish. They moved to the common room and spread the permit forgery on the low table. The paper had a copied crest and a stamped circle that looked close enough from a distance. Thomas had lifted the ink from an old municipal copy he had slipped out in Chapter 2. He had also noticed a smudge in a marginal note that had not matched any official hand. Its presence had felt like a secret. In that secret lay a narrow hope. Enya leaned over the document. The stamp looks right from arm's length. Thomas. But if Rawl lifts it to the lamplight and the ledger keeps the real stamp, we can't pass. She pushed a fork across the table. That smoke from the kitchen will make him close his eyes. That's our margin. Mateo's next breath carried a quieter shift, hope tinged with doubt. Nothing. He traced the map again until the paper softened with the oils of his thumb. Thomas watched his fingers. There is another thing. Thomas, at the municipal hall in the clerk's desk, I found a ledger copy with a smudge next to some names. I saw a mark that suggested certain names were quietly excused. I snapped a corner of the page. I thought it meant a loophole. Mateo looked up. You saw a smudge? Thomas nodded. Yes, it's not public. Riva's ledger copy had a hairline cross in the margin beside a few entries. Someone used the cross to note exceptions. If Ilan signs a note, names move. I thought it was mistake. Now I think it's a pattern. That bit of information changed the room's temperature. Desire widened into a calculation. Thomas's smudge was the first twist. It meant the law might have room for discretion. The possibility moved Mateo from a lone man forcing a barrier to someone who might be bargained for. Night ran thin. The 3 of them split tasks. Thomas would test the courier window and confirm the service road's gate timing. Enya would prepare a noise in the spilled pot. Mateo would stand ready at dawn with the map and the satchel talisman hidden under his coat. When Mateo left the tavern at the small hour before dawn, he walked down the lane that led to the checkpoint. The air felt like early iron. A low fog curled at the cobbles so close to the alley that water settled in shallow rings. He kept his collar up and his shoulders bent against the wind. His boots made soft, even sounds. He met Thomas at the marker by the ruined fence post. Thomas handed him the forged permit folded inside a scrap of oilskin. If Rawls smells forged ink, he will call for the ledger immediately. Thomas, if the ledger opens. I will be 5 paces away with a basket. I will make a noise. Enya will have the pot ready. When the ledger does not match the stamp, the guard will argue. We need the ledger to stay closed long enough for you to step by. Thomas's plan was specific and brittle. Mateo nodded, and if the ledger opens, he asked. Thomas's mouth tightened. Then you come back. We burn the permit. We run. But we try first. He looked at Mateo's face, then added, Mateo, if Rawls recognizes the talisman, do not speak. Walk slow. Keep your hands empty. He put his hand on Mateo's shoulder briefly, a touch meant to anchor. At the lane, guard Rawls stood beneath the lone lamppost, his silhouette broad and mechanical. He held a lantern and a roll of permits. His face had a particular set to the jaw that Mateo remembered from Chapter 1. A quick sign of a ledger that could be thrown like a hammer. Rawls lifted a pass that bore a stamped circle and ran his thumb over its ink. Thomas moved forward with a basket of scraps as if to sell them. Enya lingered at the corner with the pot on a small brazier. Mateo kept behind Thomas, his talisman tight under the coat. The breath in his lungs felt like cold metal. Rawls stopped Thomas. Where from? He asked. Thomas smiled small. From the east stall's guard, from the yard where they shred old cloth. Rawls' hand brushed the basket. He peered inside and pulled out a frayed ribbon. He laughed once. Smells like you ripped it from a child's toy. He let go. He did not look at Mateo. Mateo stepped forward with the forged permit and handed it to Rawls. The guard took it and turned the paper toward the lamplight. His finger traced the stamp. He squinted and then, with deliberate slow motions, reached for the ledger. Time in that instant grew an exact length. The tread of a foot, the shift of a weight, the soft scrape when a pot tipped. Thomas dropped the basket and shouted something about a child's ribbon catching the brazier. Enya knocked the pot. Hot water hissed and steam rose between the guard and the ledger. Rawls cursed and moved toward the stove. He left the permit half open. Mateo moved. He put one foot past the barrier while Rawls' head was turned. A hand gripped his satchel strap. Guard Rawls had recognized the talisman.
Thomas froze, Mateo!
Thomas hissed. Rawls' fingers found the charm and then paused. He had the charm in his hand and Mateo's shoulder in his grasp. The ledger remained in its leather binding on the small table. Rawls looked up toward the municipal road where a shadow moved. And then unexpectedly, Magistrate Ilan Thorne stepped out from behind the lamp, ledger under her arm. Ilan's arrival changed the scene. She wore her austere administrative coat, spectacles catching a thin sliver of lamplight. Her presence made sound fall away in a different pattern. Pen tapping stopped in distant memory, the scrape of a chair hung in the air. She stood tall and precise. Rawls, she said, and her voice left no room for argument. Bring the ledger. She put the ledger on the table and opened it with slow fingers. A new pressure filled the lane. The ledger's pages flicked as Ilan searched for an entry. Thomas moved back, converting alarm into polite distance. Enya crouched near the brazier and watched the edge of the confrontation as if it were a pot that might boil over. Mateo's mouth was dry. Ilan read aloud a name, Mateo Corin. Her voice held the record, not a sentence. She turned pages with guarded motions. Rawls' hand still rested on Mateo's satchel. Magistrate, he has no right to cross. The stamp is, he looked at the forged paper, then at Ilan. The stamp does not match the ledger. His tone demanded enforcement. Ilan touched the ledger's margin with a pen. She hesitated in front of the small hairline mark Thomas had seen as a smudge. Her fingers brushed the ink and then removed the pen. She did not speak quickly. Her silence lengthened the scene and forced decisions. Clerk Riva had come with her, breath short from the stairs. Ilan, Riva, and her voice held a question. There are marginal marks. Someone has crossed out or excused entries this week. If you do not act, patrols will treat us as if the ledger is absolute. She folded her hands. We cannot keep two rules. The council will ask why names vanish. Ilan's face drew a small line. She tapped the ledger with a pen the same way she had in the study, a slow pen gaze. The conflict moved across her features. Duty against the human cost that Riva's words showed. Rawl's knuckles remained white on Mateo's satchel. His stance said law first. Mateo felt the room press down on him. His fingers went limp on the strap. He heard the trimmer in his own voice, Magistrate Thorne. He said, I only ask to see the gate where my mother worked. I do not seek property or position. I want to stand outside the house for 1 hour and then return. His plea was short. It cut to detail rather than rhetoric. Ilan looked at him, then at the ledger, then at Riva. The law is clear, she said. The ledger records exclusion. But the ledger also records notes. Clerk Riva, bring me the municipal copy you keep upstairs. Riva moved without hesitating. Her face had a tautness that showed she had argued within herself before. When Riva returned with the municipal copy, Thomas's earlier smudge became central. Riva opened her copy and exposed the marginal hairline cross beside a handful of entries. She tapped the cross with a finger. This was placed there this week. She said someone made exceptions. The hand is not mine. It is smaller, quicker. Ellen's eyes narrowed behind her spectacles. She touched the cross and then drew the pen across the ledger's margin to match the mark. Her hand stayed over the record. The room held a breath of administrative motion, decisions shaped by ink. The possibility became clear. Ilan could note an exception, but she would also leave the ledger intact with a record of concession. Riva, if you grant a passage, it must be recorded, otherwise the patrols will assume chaos. If you excuse him, write the conditions. Her voice was sharp and practical. She was not pleading for mercy. She was crafting how mercy would be enforced. Ilan looked at Mateo. Her pen tapped. Mateo Corin, she said slowly, if I mark you for a conditional passage, you will sign a declaration that you will not claim residence, property, or political rights in your birthplace. You will be admitted for a single day under escort, and you will return by dusk. The ledger will record the condition and the patrols will enforce it. She set the ledger down and folded her hands. The crowd in the lane exhaled a sound that could have been relief or anger. Mateo's chest felt as if a small instrument had been set to measure his next move. The emotion in him shifted again. Fear moved into calculation, and then into a tight gratitude that had no room for speech. I will sign any paper you require. His voice had steadiness now. Thomas leaned forward. Mateo, he said, if you accept that, we lose a right. You may never settle again. Are you willing? Thomas's line of questioning was rapid and blunt. He wanted the answer because the cost would change their planning. Mateo set his jaw. I am willing to see the gate where my mother hung sheets. I am willing to let the law mark me if the ledger lets me stand by the gate once more. His words were small and precise. They were the choice of a man who knew what home meant in a single object, a place where cloth dried, not a map or a title. Ilan dipped her pen. She wrote a narrow clause into the ledger and then closed it. She looked at Rawl and then at Thomas. Enforce it precisely. She said no more, no less. Her voice carried the authority of someone who knew the law's measures and also the human detail of Riva's note. Rawl released Mateo's satchel strap. The guard's jaw unclenched in a manner that suggested he had relinquished an argument. Come then, and be quick about it. He handed the permit back, stamped and recorded. The record would show an exception, but it would also show a price. Mateo signed the short paper with a hand that shook once, then steadied. Enya pressed a coin into Thomas's palm with a sharp, grateful look. Thomas kept his face blank. Riva closed the municipal copy with a soft clap and then tied it with twine. Ilan watched each small action, her spectacles low on her nose. At the roadside, Mateo walked the escorted pass folded in the inner pocket of his coat. The dawn was pale. He saw the brick of his birthplace across a shallow field and the gate that his mother used to fix each morning. He felt a rush that stole his breath and then folded into a hollow steadiness. The law had allowed him a brief, narrow permission and fixed its condition in ink. His longing had been met with a measured, costly answer. They walked the soft lane together. The town watched, not with shouting but with the arrangements of everyday life. A baker opening shutters, a child sent to fetch water, a dog chained to a stoop. The world did not stop. At the gate, Mateo stood with his hand on the wooden post. He counted the boards and the rusty hinge by touch. He did not step across the yard. He stood just inside the permitted line and looked at the doorway where his mother had set a kettle. He put his hand over the place where a latch had been mended. He could feel the old grooved wood under his palm. The sensation was concrete and enough. The grain, the splinter, the warmth left by a hand that had held a cup there. He closed his eyes briefly and then opened them. Ilan watched him from the escort's position with a ledger in her hand. She did not speak. She made no extraneous move. Riva stood near, her jaw set in administrative calm. Tumas lingered a few paces away, shoulders tense, fingers loose on a strap. Enya waited at the lane with the pot already cold. When the hour passed, Mateo folded his hands around the satchel and turned. He had not carried anything back from the yard. He had carried a pressed scrap of a curtain and the memory of its hem between his fingers. He walked with a quiet in his step. At the lane, Ilan stopped him. She held out the ledger in which she had written the condition and a small stamped slip that recorded his passage. "You keep this," she said simply. "It will be proof that you followed the law." Her voice was the same practical, measured tone that had governed earlier decisions. Mateo took the slip. He looked at Ilan. "Why did you come, magistrate?" he asked. Ilan's hand closed on the ledger. She did not allow a long answer. "Because someone put their hand to a ledger for reasons beyond paper," she said. "Because the record shows consequences, and I chose a narrow consequence rather than a greater harm." Her words were precise. They gave no flourish. Her eyes gave away a small personal cost, a thin tightening along her mouth where she had held back a private resignation. Mateo reached forward and touched the ledger cover as if to feel the weight of the decision. He then placed the small stamped slip into his satchel beneath the talisman. "You left me a paper and you left me with a price. I will keep both." His sentence was not a protest, it was acknowledgement and acceptance. Ilan inclined her head once. She closed the ledger and turned away without a larger speech. Riva clicked the ledger's strap and started to move back toward the municipal hall. Thomas muttered, "We did not free a road, only bought a narrow hour." His voice had resignation and relief braided together. They watched each other for a moment, the party of small, practical consequences that had altered lives in concrete ways. Mateo folded the map again and smoothed its edges. He had returned from the gate but not returned home. The ledger had allowed him a measured visit and demanded a legal constraint in exchange. The law remained intact. The human ledger now bore a mark that would be read by other hands. Back in his rented room near the town edge, Mateo laid the stamped slip on the windowsill beside the folded map and the small talisman. He looked at the slip and then at the map. He thought of his mother's hands on the kettle and of the hinge on the gate that still held a small patch of dried paint. He did not feel triumphant. He felt settled into a new shape that belonged neither entirely to the town nor to Exile. Ilan came to the door without knocking. Mateo had not expected her. She carried no ledger now, only a folded page. She stood in the doorway and watched the single room with practical eyes. Mateo did not stand. "The ledger will be read by many. You must understand the limit of the hour you bought." Her tone was not reproach. It was a careful restatement of terms. Mateo nodded once. "Will you keep the map folded?" she asked. Her voice had an edge of something unsaid, an emotion she did not name. Mateo looked at the map and then at the talisman. "I will keep it folded, and I will not hide it from the ledger if asked." He kept his voice steady. The exchange between them contained what neither had spelled out: the law's cost and the human way they had each paid to preserve something small. The moment held a quiet settlement rather than a victory. Ilan tapped the ledger's edge against the doorframe, as if testing its weight one last time. "Then live within the terms," she said. "The council will ask why I allowed one name to cross. I have written it down. The record will show a restraint. Keep to it, Mateo." She turned to leave. Mateo rose and followed her to the door. He did not ask her to change the ledger. He did not beg for more. He merely watched her walk down the stair and click the hall's lock behind her. The sound of the bolt closing was a concrete end to their negotiation. He sat back on the bed and folded the map into a smaller square. He slid the stamped slip beneath the talisman in his satchel and tightened the strap. He ran his thumb across the talisman's knot once and then let his hand fall. Outside, the town resumed its day with measured motions that matched the ledger's record. The patrols continued. Roll returned to his route with the ledger's note in his pocket. Thomas and Enya resumed the work that kept them honest. The courier's deliveries and the tavern's morning calls, each of them carried the small, fixed changes that came from a narrow choice. Mateo lay back and watched the thin light at the window. He did not end with a vow. He held a stamped slip, a folded map, and a memory of a gate touched by his hand. The ledger had made a choice. He had made a trade. The chapter of his journey closed in the sound of a bolt and the small motion of folding paper. A knock came at the door. Mateo folded the satchel over his knee and rose to answer it. He opened the door and found Thomas with a new route sketched on a scrap, eyes already moving ahead. Mateo took the scrap and folded it into his pocket. The door clicked shut behind them. The ledger sat now on a shelf in the municipal hall with a small, deliberate pencil mark on one page. The record would be read and argued and, perhaps, copied by others who followed. For Mateo, the day had given him a single hour at a gate and a legal mark that would shape how the town remembered him. For Magistrate Thorn, the ledger's choice would be a small, constant note on a long list of measured decisions. For Thomas and Enya, it was the ending of a night's risk and the beginning of a routine they would speak of in short, practical sentences. Outside, a carriage rolled past the lane and the town continued. A man carried a crate, a woman swept a stoop, and a child shouted for bread. Inside a small room by the town edge, a map was folded tight and a stamped slip lay beneath a talisman knot. Mateo closed the door and set the satchel by the bed. The sound of a latch clicked once and the day moved forward.